Good morning, everyone. Good night. Happy New Year. And welcome to the panel on Connecting Africa, the second largest continent in the world after Asia. It's about 1.4, at the moment, according to the IMF, of $2.8 trillion. But to give you some comparison, the European Union has a population of only 440 into the details of some of the initiatives, such as the Agenda 2063 project and the African Continental Free Trade Area. And we've got a great panel of guests for you on this particular subject. Starting from my immediate left, we have JJ Odongo, who is the Foreign Minister of Uganda, who was previously Defense Minister and Interior Minister. We have next to him Wamkele Mene, who is the current Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, most of Africa participates in this area, which I understand officially commenced in 2021 and aims to eliminate tariffs on most goods on the continent. And at the end, last but no means least, so just to kind of set the scene, really, give a bit of context before we get into the discussion. Panelists, what they believe are the main problems, the main challenges that need to be overcome to improve integration and realize Africa's economic potential. If we could start with you, sir, Mr. Odongo.
Thank you very much, Andrew. My colleague, the panelists, the audience, good morning. It's a great pleasure indeed to be with you this morning. And I'd like to thank people of Turkey for enabling us to have this opportunity to share our views about very topical issues indeed that matter to mankind. Andrew, coming to what you've just said, and I think right from the beginning, we should rephrase the subject of discussion. Rather than saying connecting Africa, we should say reconnecting Africa. And rather than saying a prospect for integration, we should also say a prospect for reintegration. Why do I say this? Colonialism. Africa used to be connected in terms of people to people, in terms of trade. You know, the Arabs came from the East Coast through most of East Africa all the way to Eastern DRC. We had the West Africans crossing the Sahel all the way to Horn of Africa. So there was a kind of connectivity even before. So we are now looking at reconnecting. Why? Because at some point in our history, we were of artificial barriers in the form of the entities called the states that were created by colonialism. So what we are looking really is a reinvention of what used to be there before. And therefore, what are we looking at? And as we do that, we must also ask the question, why should we be attempting to do this? Is it for its own sake, or is there a bigger purpose for which we should be seeking to reconnect as a continent? Certainly there is a bigger purpose, and the purpose is for the good not only of the African people, but for the good of humanity entirely. If Africa reconnects, if Africa integrates, if Africa trades within itself, the wealthier Africa
be dealt with at the moment for Africa to reach its potential?
Thank you very much. And I want to also thank the government and the people of Turkey for once again convening us here in Antalya, and I'm happy to be in the panel with the Honorable Minister and Professor. I think the Minister, Honorable Minister, we have artificial borders, as Honorable Minister said. We have low base. $4 trillion. That is consumer spending and business spending. So it's a significant market, but fragmented. So the rules that we have developed through the AFCFTA will enable us to overcome this challenge of fragmentation which has existed since the end of colonialism. Now, in this endeavor, there are challenges and opportunities. Let me start with the challenges. Intra-Africa trade must be on the basis of good infrastructure that supports trade. We have an infrastructure deficit of over $100 billion annually. And so from a point of view of integrating an economy as large as Africa's economy, infrastructure is the key to unlocking that potential. The second challenge, as I see it, relates to the establishment of productive capacity. We export to the rest of the world, mainly the former colonies. We export unprocessed minerals. We are overly reliant on the export of these unprocessed minerals. So we've got to take active steps to invest in Africa's industrial critical minerals. We've got to redouble our efforts to ensure that we produce in Africa. Third is a challenge that I see, the cost of transport and logistics for connecting our continent. These are challenges, but they are also opportunities. Let's take, for example, the challenge of the cost of infrastructure, the over $100 billion deficit that I pointed to. That's an opportunity for private sector to invest, whether we are talking about pension funds, private equity, sovereign wealth funds. It's an opportunity to invest in Africa's infrastructure and see commercially priced returns on that investment. Even in the area that I cited of relatively low productive capacity, there also lies an opportunity for us to bring in investment, whether it is in the automotive sector, in processing of critical minerals. It's an opportunity for us
speakers, and allow me to start by thanking the audience by being with us today on the very last day of the forum. Well, as an academic, yes, I do have a long list of challenges, but I'll be only talking about 4 or 5 of them. Don't worry, but as Mr. Mene has mentioned, yes, there are many challenges, but they also indicate Africa's growth potential, which is immense. And I think regional integration efforts, which AFCFTA is a key example in this regard, might help to address those challenges, because let me give you some striking examples here. The recent IMF data reveals that 12 out of the 20 fastest growing economies in the world are from Africa. But there are economic disparities, and the differences at the economic development levels might produce unequal benefits, obviously. And Africa is also home to the 30% of the world's mineral reserves. And by some critical reserves, this share raises to 90%. But the dependency on the export of those natural resources makes African countries vulnerable to external shocks and intervention. So what is needed here is to move beyond the export of those raw materials to value-added products. And as Mr. Mene has mentioned, AFCFTA is actually designed in a way to steer African economies, move beyond this raw material exports to value-added products. And well, what is equally important here is to invest in not only in those natural resources, but also the renewable energy as well, because Africa is also very rich in terms of renewable energy sources such as solar energy, wind energy, hydropower, geothermal sources, and addressing this energy deficits is also vital to initiate regional integration efforts and to accelerate them. Well, Africa also has the youngest population in the world. 70% of Africa's population is under the age of 30, and by 2050, it is expected that 1 in 4 people on the planet will be African. So this large and fastest growing young population is considered as one of the most important assets of Africa, but there is unemployment. And the unemployment rates are often very high among the youth and among the women, so there is the need to create more jobs, especially for these groups, because it is particularly the youth that aspire to migrate abroad for better opportunities. And it is estimated that with the proper and full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, only the manufacturing sector will create up to 16 million jobs. But a key factor that stands out, as Mr. Mene has pointed out, the infrastructural development, both physical and digital infrastructure. So this is vital to accelerate regional integration efforts, because low quality and inadequate transport infrastructure, they impede intra-Africa trade, they impede regional integration efforts, which goes back to the colonialism, obviously, as most of the ills that we witness today can be traced back to the colonial period, because during the colonial period, infrastructure in the continent was designed in a way to facilitate the export of Africa's raw materials to Western markets. So it wasn't designed in a way to facilitate or support internal or intra-regional trade. So this is why African countries now trade more with Western countries than their counterparts, and this is why they are more integrated with Western markets than with their regional markets. But there's also the need for a unified digital payment system. I know there's PAPS, Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, developed by Afreximbank, and it has made significant progress after its inception to reduce reliance on USD, on Euro, but there's still more job to be done. So it faces challenges. It needs to expand its network, because Pan-African Payment and Settlement System has been successful in integrating over, I think it was 13 African central banks so far, and over 100 commercial banks. So it needs to expand its network and develop a cross-border payment system that allows Africa's 42 currencies to be convertible among themselves and to reduce further reliance on foreign currencies. There are other problems such as fragmented markets, non-tariff barriers, or security challenges. I know we'll be talking about them quite a lot, but I have to say that Africa has it all. Africa has all the resources that is necessary to accelerate regional integration efforts, but there are several challenges that hinders its growth and prosperity.
Thank you, Elam. Now we have a responder from the floor, Khan Devegiolu. I don't know whereabouts he is. If we've got a microphone for him. Where are you, Khan? Can you show us your hand? There you are. Who'd like to respond to to what's been said so far? Do we have a microphone for him? The microphone is coming. Khan is the coordinator for North Africa at ORSAM, the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies in Ankara. Khan, the floor is yours.
Dear moderator and dear ministers and esteemed participants, Africa's vision of becoming an integrated continent has long been voiced but has yet to be fully realized. Today, I would like to evaluate the steps that need to be taken to this vision and to share my own insights along with reflections inspired by the remarks of fellow speakers. First of all, we're talking about the strategic importance of integration. The African continental free trade area encompassing 54 countries represents a historic mission for continental integration by creating a West single market. And but continental integration must go beyond the economic aspects and encompass social, cultural, and political dimensions as well. Without this holistic approach, sustainable development will not be achievable. And maybe talking about second is a key challenge, and also the participants talking about it. But the infrastructure deficits, particularly in transportation and digital connectivity, and low levels of institutional harmonization undermine integration efforts, and insufficient financing financing constitutes a major obstacle to both transport projects and digital transformation. And when we look at the role of African continental free trade area, it has the potential to contribute significantly to increased local production, the expanded employment opportunities, and diversified intra-African investments through trade liberalization. However, the fully harness this potential, it's essential to harmonize customs and logistics systems and to strengthen digital infrastructure. And also, we need to thinking about the link between integration and peace for the Africa. Enhanced intracontinental connectivity supports it's not only economic growth, but also regional stability. Shared infrastructure and mutual interdependence can reduce tensions between countries and facilitate peace-building process. The social and cultural integration also reinforces this process by strengthening a shared African identity. Africa has some of the crises, from the Sahel crisis to DRC, the intra-conflict crisis, the Sudan, Ethiopia, and also Somalia. Some of the projects, Lobito corridors and others is important for this key challenge. And last but not least, I think key sources of financing for the infrastructure investments include Africa Development Bank, the Africa Union, and the private sector, and public-private partnership. Within the Africa Free Trade Area framework, the creation of joint projects pools can help channel investments more efficiently, in my opinion. The African integration is no longer just a vision. It's a necessity that must now proceed through concrete steps. With the right political will, economic unity, and cultural partnership, I firmly believe that Africa can claim its rightful place in the global system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Devejiolu. I just wanted to ask a question now specifically about the free trade area. So if you can start with Mr. Mene perhaps on this one. The fact that it's now in force, if you like, in position, do you think this will now create the motivation to then build all this infrastructure, the transport systems, because you have to make the system work now? Do you think that's how it will develop in the future?
Absolutely. The objective is to encourage and mobilize development finance institutions, private sector, mobilize investment to build infrastructure that supports trade. We have begun to see this. So, for example, over the last 5 years or 6 years, the African Development Bank has invested over $45 billion in infrastructure. Since its establishment, Afreximbank has invested over $20 billion on trade supporting infrastructure. It is, of course, not enough. So we've got to mobilize more investment. The rules that we have developed establish a harmonized, integrated market at law, which is, of course, the starting point. That's what investors want to see first. They want to see, do you have rules that create a single market? Do you have rules that enable the resolution of disputes in a prescribed manner by applying the law? These are factors that matter, that investors, whether they are development finance institutions or indeed private sector, they consider these factors as they look at investment opportunities that will support the trade that we want to see. There are signs of encouragement in terms of the infrastructure deficit, addressing it. I've just mentioned the significant portfolio of investment that Afreximbank and AFDB have undertaken. Between Africa Finance Corporation, Afreximbank, Africa 50, these institutions are well set to address the deficit in infrastructure. But you can't do it if you don't have common rules that apply through the continent that give investors the confidence to invest either in agriculture or indeed in the area of hard infrastructure. Let me just, if I may, address one other point which is very important. Our colleague mentioned it, and that is Africa's digital economy. The International Finance Corporation projects that by the year 2050, Africa's digital economy will be up to $712 billion. That is a very, very significant digital market. In anticipation of that, and to enable our continent to be on a path to benefit from that projection, our heads of states, our leaders adopted the Protocol on Digital Trade, first of its kind around the world, which creates a single market for the digital economy, establishes harmonized regulations for the digital economy, creates opportunities, particularly for young people who are innovative in the digital economy, and enables seamless payment systems across the continent, movement of data. So this is a very innovative instrument, the Protocol on Digital Trade of the AFCFTA, because it leverages on the projection that our digital economy going forward on the continent will be one of the drivers of economic prosperity, particularly for small, medium enterprises, smallholder farmers who will be able to access markets on digital tools. So this is a very important development, and I'm very, very encouraged that our heads of states have the vision about Africa's digital economy.
Mm-hmm. Elem, do you think the free trade area will provide enough impetus to overcome these infrastructure challenges for Africa?
Yes, obviously. Well, it creates a unified and a stable market of 1.4 billion people, and it has an over $3 billion GDP in total. So AFCFTA does not only create the world's largest free trade area, but it is also the 8th largest economic bloc in the continent. So it will facilitate to unlock Africa's potential, and we mentioned about the challenges. I understand that we need to focus on those challenges, and there are many of them. So there are also security challenges, because regional integration requires stability, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no stability in Africa. There's stability, both political and economic stability in some African countries, but there are conflicts, terrorist attacks, armed violence, extremist groups in others. And there are also other challenges. There are environmental challenges. There's climate change, droughts, and floods, sometimes at the same season. You know, those environmental challenges are defined in the literature as threat multipliers. And there are also other challenges in the integration of the markets. I know that regional economic communities are defined as the building blocks of the African continental free trade area, but sometimes they hinder policy coherence, and they hinder the implementation of the continental level goals, but still they align with AFCFTA's goal, or the larger goal of creating a unified market. And perhaps more importantly, and I think we'll be talking about it later on, it helps to establish peace and stability. Because without stability, to economic integration, you need stability. But without security, there's no way that this can be long-term, this can be sustainable. So it helps to reduce conflicts, because if the people are bounded by trade, if they are bounded by roads, so they are less likely to fight and more likely to collaborate, because we have seen the examples in history. I know that we have examples from Africa, the regional integration efforts and mutual interdependency, stronger interdependency. They create mutual economic benefits, they create mutual economic interests, which makes conflicts more costly and collaboration more desirable.
Mr. Odongo, in Africa there are a number of regional political economic groupings like SADC in Southern Africa, there's ECOWAS in Western Africa, IGAD Eastern Africa, and also your own organization, which Uganda is a member of, the Eastern African Community. Now, as far as I understand it, trading within these regional blocks is a lot cheaper than it is to trade throughout the whole of Africa. So what do you think the role of these groups could play in the future? Will they become redundant as there's more integration in the continent as a whole, or will they move into some kind of other formulation, do you think? What's their use at the moment, do you think?
Thank you very much, Andrew. First of all, I think it is important for us to appreciate one fact, that the question of integration of Africa is not a new question. It is as old as the creation of the Continental Organization, the Organization of African Unity. Right then in the 60s, there were arguments as to how Africa would integrate. Would we begin at the continental level, or would we begin at a regional level? And so those arguments continued, and they do continue. That's why, as you've correctly pointed out, we now do have regional economic blocs. But what is important for us now to appreciate is that these regional economic blocs are being seen as building blocks for the process of integration of the entire continent. They are seen as transitory. They are not as ends in themselves in as far as the integration process is concerned. So whereas they provide us with opportunities to recognize the fruits and benefits of integration, we are at the back of our mind aware that they are leading us to a process of an entire continental integration. Yes, they have benefits. Yes, they show us the way forward, and I think they should be acting as an encouragement, as an impetus for a quicker continental integration.
Thank you very much. I wanted to bring in another issue now, which we've already sort of touched on a little bit, and that is regional peacekeeping, conflict resolution, that kind of thing within Africa. As part of the Agenda 2063 initiative by the African Union, one of their pledges is to try to eradicate conflict and civil war in Africa, which obviously it's quite a difficult task to do in a short period of time. But how does this problem impact Africa in your views? How could it be resolved or at least alleviated? Because according to a recent UN report, I think they said that since 1950, something like 45% of the coup attempts in the world had taken place in Africa. And also the African Union at the moment, 6 of the members are suspended because of coup attempts that have taken place in their country. So how do you see this problem being tackled on the continent? Maybe Mr. Odongo first again on this one.
Thank you once again for raising this question. And I just wanted to add to what Dr. Mkele had mentioned earlier as the challenges that the continent faces in terms of integration. Beyond what he clearly pointed out, there are 2 other challenges that I wanted to quickly mention so that I can come to this question of security on the continent. One is that we cannot begin to think about integrating the continent when only 18% of the population of the continent is in the money economy. So when we are talking about trade, who will be trading when only 18% are within the money economy? So there is that question that we must resolve. Encourage as many of our people on the continent to be uplifted from subsistence into the money economy so that they become participants in this integration process. 2, and as you've correctly pointed out, the other major challenge that we must deal with is the question of security within the continent. You are absolutely correct. Quite a large part of the continent is involved in security challenges. Is it the Horn of Africa, the Great Lakes, the Sahel? All of these issues continue to bedevil the African continent. The good news is that the benefits of peace, the dividend of peace, is beginning to be recognized, and there is a greater impetus for the continent itself and the well-wishers for the continent to make sure that many of these conflicts are being resolved. Right now, you may be aware, we have a challenge in Eastern DRC, whereas the EAC and SADC are coming together to resolve this problem. Our colleagues from Qatar have come in and given us a new impetus in resolving this problem. We have a problem in South Sudan. We have a problem in the Sudan. As you may be aware, Mr. Andrew, in next week, on Tuesday, there will be a conference specifically in London to deal with the Sudan question. We also continue to engage our colleagues and partners and friends within the Sahel region. So yes, there is the question of security, but it's a matter that all of us are seized with, and we are seeking to find solutions to those problems. What is also encouraging is that in spite of those conflicts, we continue to interact, we continue to see how we can be able to relate and trade in spite of those conflicts. But it would be absolutely fantastic, it would be absolutely good if there was no conflict at all.
Absolutely. Mr. Mene, how do you think the free trade area can feed into this problem of conflict resolving, and what effect do you think it's going to have on the situation in Africa?
Well, we know that where there is interconnectedness in terms of the economy and trade, that the likelihood of conflict reduces. I think Honorable Minister set out the measures and the interventions that are being made to resolve the existing conflicts. Trade is an instrument of peace. Where there is a prosperity of trade across borders, we see, as I mentioned, a reduced likelihood for instability to arise. If you look at the incidents, the coup d'etats that have happened in Niger, for example, as soon as that coup d'etat happened, farmers were shut out of the market of ECOWAS. They could not export into the ECOWAS market anymore. Similarly, in other parts of the continent where you have a coup d'etat or a conflict, farmers are affected, informal traders are affected, those who trade across borders. So it does have a very, very significant impact on building a continental market. But that said, again, to re-emphasize the point Honorable Minister has just made, there are interventions that are being made to resolve these conflicts. In 2023, at the summit in Malabo, our heads of states were very, very clear that they do not tolerate unconstitutional changes of power, and therefore there must be clarity that the African Union is not going to be a haven for unconstitutional changes of power because of the various impacts that this has on individual countries and on economies. So our heads of states are clear that at least in relation to coup d'etat, as they impact on the economy and on trade, this year, from 2023 actually onwards, again our heads of states declared that this is the decade of silencing the guns, and various interventions are being made in that regard. Obviously, we are not making as fast progress as we would like to see in terms of silencing the guns, but again, there is a very strong political motivation to end these conflicts that are taking place. But I remain optimistic that trade in Africa will be an instrument of peace, and we have begun to see success stories in this regard. If you look, for example, the East African community, how well integrated it is as a regional economic community, there has not been widespread regional conflict. Similarly, in West Africa, ECOWAS, notwithstanding the coup d'etats that have happened, but ECOWAS is well integrated, is a functioning regional economic community that enables commerce and trade to happen in a peaceful environment within the regional economic community itself of ECOWAS. So I do think that although there are hotspots, although there are pockets of instability and conflicts in general, the continent is not characterized by conflict and instability. And I've just cited ECOWAS and the East African community, these regional economic communities that have managed to ensure that through economic prosperity, that there is peace and stability.
Elaine, what do you think about the potential for conflict resolution within Africa itself, and how that can help integration and economic development there?
Well, I think we all agree that regional integration is an important means in achieving peace and security among the member countries, because connectivity is not only about the elimination of tariffs or non-tariff barriers, and this is why AFCFTA is defined as a trade facilitator, but it is also defined as a connectivity enabler, and some even say that it's a peace strategy, because connectivity and interdependence, it's not only economic. There's an extensive literature on this one saying that cooperation in one sector, especially the economic sector, has spillover effects in other sectors such as politics and security. And we mentioned about the reasons, the challenges behind the low level of intra-Africa trade, because we know that Africa is the least integrated continent in the world. But I think we also need to place a focus on maritime trade as well, because most of the world's trade, some 80 or 85% of the world's trade, goes through the seas, goes through the oceans. And there are armed robbery, there are piracy attacks, both at the Gulf of Guinea and off the Somalia coast. And Turkey is also a member of this Combined Task Force 151. It has been contributing to this force since its inception in 2009. It's been fighting with armed robbery and piracy attacks in the region, which is very vital. But there are also other security challenges. There are displacement crises in the Sahel. There's a humanitarian crisis going on in Sudan, which is defined by the UN as one of the biggest humanitarian crises in the world. And this makes over 10 million Sudanese people displaced. So this corresponds to the 1/5 of the Sudanese population, which is very tragic, because Sudan has once been Africa's largest agricultural exporter, but half of the Sudanese people are now in dire need of humanitarian assistance. This creates food insecurity, which is a major impediment on regional integration. Because we know that those regional issues are rarely regional. Now they have implications. They do have implications on all of us. We have witnessed it after the Ukraine crisis, and we see that this Red Sea crisis, they already disrupted maritime trade, so the commercial vessels, they are trying to reroute. So this will eventually increase fuel prices. This will eventually increase food prices, which will have more tragic effects on some African countries. And we mentioned about regional economic communities. They tried conflict resolution mechanisms, because although the name suggests that they are economic communities, they are more than that. So we mentioned about the East African community. East African community has detailed measures on how to ensure peace and security in the region. So when you look through the founding agreement of EAC, excuse my emphasis on East Africa, but we have Honorable Minister Odongo here with us. So IGAD also has its own conflict resolution mechanism. East African community also has its panel of imminent persons to support mediation efforts. It has its own early warning mechanism. IGAD also has its own early warning mechanism. It also has this Center of Excellence to fight violent extremism. So those regional economic communities, they are also vital in conflict resolution, conflict management mechanisms. And ECOWAS was also defined as an important example in this regard, because when it was established some 40 years ago, ECOWAS was a solely economic organization with no security mandate, but realizing that economic development is not possible without peace and stability, so ECOWAS adopted its own conflict resolution mechanisms, and it intervened in different African contexts. It did also use some non-military means such as mediation and imposing sanction regimes. So those regional economic communities are vital to make sure that there's peace and stability in the continent, and AFCFTA does not replace this structure, but it builds on them.
Thank you very much. This will be the last round of answers, so if there's any particular point you want to make that we might have missed, it's probably a good opportunity now. But the last question I wanted to ask is, what sort of social and cultural aspects can contribute to integration in Africa? And just raise a couple of other issues if you want to respond to them. One is, I understand there's something like, maybe at a conservative estimate, 1,300 languages in Africa. So is there a need for, in a more integrated continent, languages which everybody understands or you can more easily deal with, or is that a non-issue? And also, what do you think about the idea of ultimately freedom of movement for people across the whole of the continent? Maybe we could start with you, Mr. Mene. Sorry. Either one of you is okay. If you'd like to go first, Mr. Odonga, that's okay.
That's all right. Thank you. Thank you very much once again. I think the question of culture and language on the African continent is being overplayed. If you look at that continent very critically, you can actually see that there are 4 or 5 broad linguistic groups. Take, for example, the Bantu. Whereas you may say there are Baganda, there are this and that, the root words in all those languages are similar. So there is a possibility of them communicating across large swaths of the continent, from, for example, Eastern Africa all the way to Southern Africa. The word Buntu is common to all of them. So there are only variations of those languages. But that does not miss the point that there is indeed a need to integrate in as far as language is concerned. How do we do that? There are attempts already in developing what we would call African languages. For example, Eastern Africa, there are several different communities, but there is a significant effort to only speak one language, Kiswahili. From Uganda, from Sudan, Eastern DRC, Tanzania, Kenya, Burundi, Rwanda, if you spoke Swahili, you would be understood everywhere. So there are efforts to develop common language, African languages across these regions. And we do recognize that there is a benefit in that line of thinking. We hope, for example, in North Africa, Arabic. And by the way, if you spoke Arabic, you easily understand Kiswahili, because 30% of Kiswahili is Arabic. So there are already frameworks, there are already roots for developing cultural affinities. It is also important, of course, that beyond that, we should be able to emphasize education in as far as merging and creating common understanding across regions. So yes, there are challenges, but also there are opportunities and possibilities in addressing those challenges.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mene. Maybe you could address the point about freedom of movement as well, please.
The free movement of persons, particularly business people, continues to be a big challenge. The protocol of the African Union on free movement of persons has been ratified by only 4 countries out of 55. So clearly, we are not making progress. And we know from the history of the European Union, the contribution of free movement of persons, particularly business persons, traders, to intra-regional trade is significant. Again, if I point to the experience of ECOWAS, that has free movement of persons, East African Community, free movement of persons, where that happens, we see a significant upward impact on intra-regional trade or investment. So we have to accelerate this as the African continent, the free movement of persons. We have to transform the manner in which we approach free movement of persons, not as an immigration issue, but as a trade, business, and investment issue to enable relatively free movement of persons. We have no business requiring visas of one another. As a matter of fact, last year, President Ruto made this point. His Excellency, the President of Kenya, made this point that the colonialists came and left us with visas, and we continue to impose visas on one another, when they themselves in the European Union have gotten rid of visas. So we have a long way to go in this regard, I know that our leaders, the African Union, must be seized with this particular matter of enabling movement of persons across the continent. It is not acceptable that as an African, I'm going to South Africa, I must apply for a visa and go and queue in the embassy. Somebody visiting country X from Europe enters with just their passport, no visa required. So we have to correct this anomaly. Let me end, I know this is the last segment, let me end where I started. And that is that Africa's challenges are Africa's opportunities. Whether we are talking about infrastructure, which we mentioned, the infrastructure deficit, or indeed, as Professor said, even on, when it comes to the crisis of climate change, that is Africa's opportunity. Even though the continent of Africa contributes less than 4% to global emissions, but we bear the brunt of the impact of climate change, whether it is through droughts or indeed through floods, excessive weather conditions. In that crisis, in that challenge, is an opportunity for us to transition to renewable energy, to solar, hydro. All of these, this transition presents an opportunity for green industrial development. It presents an opportunity for green intra-Africa trade, so that whilst we are addressing this challenge of climate change, at the same time, we address the issue of Africa's continued industrial development, but we do so in a manner where we are fully conscious of the imperative of climate change and the environment. So I want to stress that our challenges are exactly Africa's opportunities for economic prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you. And Elem, what's your view on the social and cultural factors, and if they will have enough sort of pull, if you like, to influence this integration process?
Well, the regional integration and connectivity, they often start at the economic domain, but you are right, there is the need for a combination of political and social factors, because the connectivity does not only require free movement of goods and services, but it also includes free movement of people. And African countries are well aware of this fact because this regional integration efforts have been tried before, have been tried many times, and one concrete example is the establishment of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, and the aim was not only to integrate the continent economically, but it also aimed to integrate the continent socially and politically, and we mentioned about EAC. EAC has the ultimate aim to create a political federation among the member states after they complete 3 phases. After the customs union, after the common market and monetary union, they aimed at establishing a political federation. And it has been tried before. They have, after the Organization of African Unity, they had adopted Lagos Plan of Action in 1980, and it wasn't that successful, but African countries decided to give regional integration talks another try, and they adopted the treaty establishing African Economic Community, also known as the Abuja Agreement, which came into force in 1994. So the regional economic communities that we mentioned, they are the building blocks of this agreement, and they can facilitate to initiate first the economic integration and then social and political cohesion, because those trade agreements, they do not only create free trade areas, but they also build cohesion. They establish common values, common understandings. There's a commitment to further relations among the member states.
Thank you very much, Elem. Thank you much to all of you for coming to this panel here today. I hope you found it interesting and informative. I'm not sure we've got really time for questions from the floor. We've overrun already, I'm afraid. But if we can have a round of applause for the panel, please, for coming today and giving their experience. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.